Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast today on the 21st of June, 2018.
Profit from air and hate, hoarding wealth and mass power. The walls have been will not stop or cure. It's humanity's darkest time. We are ruled by fate and liar.
Yeah, so I didn't get a chance this weekend to put out an episode of the podcast because I was actually doing a lot of research over the last couple weeks in preparation for a live stream that I ended up doing on Tuesday, the 19th of June. And I've already downloaded the video, going to clip that. That'll be up on my channel right after this podcast. Actually, I'll probably upload this and then upload the next one. And in that one, I was talking to Little Gray Cells about the Bank of Canada. I very thankful that he was willing to have me on his channel. He's a guy I've watched for a while, and I was hoping to eventually do some collaboration with him, and finally got the opportunity. Also, a couple opportunities to speak to a couple other people. One of them is actually one of my own viewers as well, Concan. You've probably seen her in the. She may have left she's left some comments on my channel before, so it was great to talk to her. And another gentleman named Ted. So that was a really good. It was a really good live stream. Actually, it was a long one. It was about 3 hours long, I think. By the time we were all finished. And we talked about the Bank of Canada. We also talked about a bunch of other subjects as well. Just sort of they came up. So I just want to take the opportunity once again to thank Little Gray Cells for having me on his channel, and I'm hoping to have him on soon. And from the sound of it, it looks like it won't be the end of us talking. We're going to be having a few more collaborations at least. So that's going to be a lot of fun. So there's been a lot that's gone over the last couple weeks since my last episode I put out, which was dealing mostly with the trade war that began after the G7. But before I get into a little more about that, I actually first wanted to talk a little bit about what's happened with Maxime Bernier. So Maxime Bernier, he was one of the final contenders against Andrew Scheer last year for the conservative leadership race. It was very close. It was just Andrew Scheer won by 1, maybe 2%. It was actually pretty damn close, and I've always liked Maxime Bernier. He's a guy that his policies were more in line with my own. If I had to classify myself, I would say I end up more on the libertarian end of the spectrum. So him being a libertarian, he's a pure libertarian through and through. And so I've liked him as an MP, and he's not perfect. I mean, he's made mistakes in the past. Probably the biggest mistake he ever made was the fact that he left classified documents at his girlfriend's place a few years ago, and she had connections to the Hells Angels, so that's like one of the dumbest things you can do. But I've always respected the guy. But recently, Andrew Scheer has decided to toss him from the shadow cabinet. Now, the shadow cabinet is pretty much whoever is in the main opposition to the party in charge, so the Liberals in charge, and the fact the Conservatives are the main opposition. The shadow cabinet are pretty much they're put in these rules, these unofficial rules, and they're usually their whole point is to be the critics of of their opposition. And each one holds their distinct role. For instance, Michelle Rempel is the critic on immigration, so she's part of the shadow cabinet. But with everything that ended up happening with with everything that's happened with the G7 and between Canada and America over these last few weeks, well, Maxime Bernier ended up getting tossed from the shadow cabinet, and this really had to do more or less because of his opposition. I think it has to do mostly with his opposition to supply management, and I covered supply management in my last episode, but I'm not a huge fan of supply management. I think I made that a little bit obvious, but mostly it has to do with it is a pretty protectionist thing to do, but also it means that all of our prices for dairy have gone up, whether that's egg, cheese, milk, cream, whatever it happens to be. We have fixed prices, but we're usually paying more for those prices. Now, Maxime Bernier, that was one thing he campaigned on when he was running for the conservative leadership. He campaigned on the fact that he was going to scrap supply management. Andrew Scheer did the opposite. He said that he's going to uphold supply management, and I think this was one of the final decisions for a lot of people. It meant that Andrew Scheer gained the support of the a dairy cartel, as it's known. And it probably was one of the deciding factors for him to lose against Andrew Scheer. But and for me, one thing that really pisses me off is I found that Maxime Bernier has made a lot of sacrifices in order to maintain the party. Well, first of all, he's been very vocal against identity politics. He's been online every time he's online. He's been constantly hammering anything to do with identity politics, especially when we're talking about the Liberals or the NDP playing it. So I really respect him for that. He put his book on hold because his book was covering a lot of it had to cover with how he lost out to the leadership race. But he ended up putting that on hold when it appeared that may look bad on the party. It may look bad on Andrew Scheer. He wants a more united party, so he ended up putting that book on hold. And one chapter he did dedicate was to supply management. But, again, trying to keep unity, he decided to put that on hold. But since the whole supply management has came up in the conversations when we're talking about the NAFTA negotiations, and Trump wants us to scrap our supply management, well, that has once again come to bit him in the ass, and Andrew Scheer ended up kicking him out of the caucus. Now, I've said before in the past that Andrew Scheer seems like a guy that's unwilling to stand up for his principles. For instance, he is a Roman Catholic who has said that he is against the idea of abortion, but he's also not going to bring it up in the House of Commons. He's not going to try and put any legislation forward, no bills, no nothing. So, kind of already going against your principles, and this is something he stated more or less right off the start. And then he's also proven when it comes to free speech, this is probably the second good example of how he's not unwilling to stand up for free speech, even despite the fact that he has talked about it. It's one of his main driving points. Even in the conservative Constitution, if you look it up, one thing the conservatives say that they're going to uphold is free speech. So the first example was earlier this year is when Lynn Bayak, one of the senators, she had some controversial material up on her website, and usually it was dealing with the residential school system. And then Andrew Scheer kicked her from the caucus, kicked her from the Conservative Party. And I think she's still on the Senate right now, sitting as an independent. But this was a good example where he can stand up for free speech, because the whole idea of free speech is it's not supposed to protect popular speech. Popular speech doesn't need to be protected, so you have to protect it when it comes to unpopular speech. Well, he took the first opportunity because it made him look bad. He took the first opportunity to kick her out. And for my longtime viewers, this was the time when Rick Mehta ended up came onto the radar for me. I was unaware of the man at the time, but he was my very first interview for my podcast, and he got in trouble with some people in the university because he was criticizing Andrew Scheer for putting out a tweet where he said he kicked Lynn Bayak out. And so Rick Mehta put out a tweet where he's criticizing Andrew Scheer over this, and this ended up blowing up on him. So that's when I ended up speaking to the professor. Now, it has to do with Maxime Bernier, because Maxime Bernier has been against supply management, and he's spoken out against it many times. Again, he has a chapter in his book which is dedicated to supply management. Well, now Andrew Scheer has kicked him out of the caucus because of it. Out of the shadow cabinet, I should say. Not out of the caucus. He's still part of the Conservative Party, but now he's a backbencher. This is the last place where we should have Maxime Bernier. I think he's actually, people say that he's not an insider. I know somebody like James Pawson, who's also another YouTuber. He does very well for himself covering Canadian politics. He's someone that in the past has put out a video where he said that he doesn't really like Andrew Scheer. I think this was around the time of the leadership race, where he was pretty much saying that Andrew Scheer, where Maxime Bernier is an insider. He's not this guy coming from the grassroots. But I think that many times Maxime Bernier has proved himself to be part of the better part of the politicians. There's many that we don't like, but Maxime Bernier has always been one of those politicians that I have liked. But now, he has great skill, especially when we're talking about dealing with economics. This is where something he seems to shine in. He's now being put on the backbench because of this. And I can't remember, I was told a couple days ago during the live stream that I did with Little Gray Cells, but he was also quietly kicked out of another committee. I can't remember what it is off the top of my head, but so. But Maxime Bernier has lost a lot over this whole supply management thing. There's no reason for it because we're dealing with a there's reason to protect our farmers without a doubt. The farmers are the ones that they work hard, they provide food for the cities. It's very important without a doubt. But when we're also dealing with something that's supposed to deal with free trade, then we also have to understand this is a protectionist thing to do. So it is something maybe we should do away with. There are some reasons to be concerned about getting American dairy products up here. For one, that was actually pointed out to me by a viewer of mine. She ended up stating, or they ended up stating, I don't actually know. They ended up stating that it was a lot of the American farmers usually give hormones to their cattle in order to get more yield, to get better results. But because of this, there's a lot of hormones inside of the milk. So if we were to import American milk, then we have that possibility being in there. That's always a possibility, but we always have the option of buying Canadian, which is something else that's come out of this whole trade war between Canada and America, is that a lot of people are now deciding to buy Canadian, which there's nothing wrong with that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with supporting your local. Nothing wrong with supporting your local farmers or supporting local products. You want the money to stay inside of Canada, so nothing wrong with that. But my main problem with this is just how Maxime Bernier is being punished simply because he's not towing the line. This is something that Andrew Scheer and the Conservatives have criticized Justin Trudeau for doing many times, for punishing those who do not toe the line. So Andrew Scheer is proving himself to be not that much different. He's different than Justin Trudeau, but he has the same overall attitude. He wants people in the party to toe the line, and he's not really giving too many people the option of going out and speaking their own mind. And Maxime Bernier is the latest example of this. He is the latest example of people who are being punished by the Conservative Party simply because he is a free thinker, simply because he's not going to listen and completely give in. He's going to say what he wants to say. He's going to think what he wants to think. But in this day and age, even when it comes to right-wing politics, it seems to be seeping in that this is now being unacceptable. And one thing about Maxime Bernier that I came to notice as I was doing my research over the last couple weeks when it came to the Bank of Canada is that he's spoken out heavily against what the Bank of Canada does and how we're doing our monetary system, which brings me down to one thing I wanted to talk about. Now, in this live stream I did, of course, we were talking about the Bank of Canada, but I want to take the opportunity to speak a little more on the subject. And I want to start off today with a quote by William Lyon Mackenzie King, the Prime Minister of Canada from 1935. His quote was from 1935, I believe. And the quote is, "Once a nation parts with the control of its currency and credit, it matters not who makes the nation's laws. Usury, once in control, will wreck any nation." So what you need to know about the Bank of Canada is the Bank of Canada, it started off as a private institution, but by 1938 it ended up becoming a public institution, became known as a Crown Corporation. A Crown Corporation is something that is owned by the government, but it kind of acts as its own independent it acts as its own sort of independent company. They still have the regulations, they still have to answer to the government, but more or less they not as much as a lot of other ministries that are out there, or agencies that are out there. And what this means, and so this is money. This is a bank that was supposed to be used in order so that way the government can borrow from it, which would be lent. It would be lent to the government. If we're talking about the federal government, it'd be lent at about a third of the overall GDP that we bring in. That's how the maximum amount they could lend to the federal government. Or if we're talking about the provincial government, and I think also the municipal governments, they can lend to these governments for about a quarter of their GDP that they bring in. But the main thing about this was the fact that you could lend it out and then not charge any interest rates, so we don't have to worry. Everyone knows that the whole interest rate, the idea of an interest rate is that the longer it takes you to pay off, the more in money that gets compounded on top of it. So this is obviously a problem. But what we've been doing ever since 1974, and you can thank Pierre Elliott Trudeau for doing this, is he decided to move away from taking money from the Bank of Canada. Instead of having the Bank of Canada lend us money, we're going to start borrowing from private banks, and we're going to start borrowing from international banks. So, for instance, the International Monetary Fund or the Bank of International Settlements. These are just a couple where we can name where we're starting to borrow from. But because of this, this is where most of our debt is coming from. This is why we are about $1 trillion in debt at the moment. I don't need this right now. Is because we borrow from these international banks, these private banks, and then they're putting abhorrent interest rates on top of the Canadians, and then every future generation has to pay more and more and more and more. This is the same thing that America has done, and many countries across the world. They've gone away from using their own nationalized banks in order to use these private banks, and it's biting us in the ass. In fact, when I was looking into it, we found out that about 14% of our GDP goes to pay off the interest rates on our debt. And right now, most of the debt that our country has accumulated, about 70 to 75% of our debt, is actually been just the interest that has been tacked on from us borrowing from these amounts. And once again, you can thank Pierre Elliott Trudeau for doing that, our current Prime Minister's father. A lot of people like to act like this guy was a good Prime Minister, but the more and more you read into the things he's done, you realize he was a terrible Prime Minister. He was god-awful. I remember a while ago, I was, and I say a while ago, this is probably a year or two ago, I was discussing with a friend of mine who has been a conservative for years. Like, he's older than I am, and he's been conservative for a long friggin' time. And he hated Pierre Elliott Trudeau, hated him with an absolute passion. And at the time, I didn't really understand why. But as I've started looking more into what this guy has done, it is a terrible, terrible decision. It was a terrible decision to put this guy in charge. And he is one of the longest, if not the longest serving prime ministers ever. So he did a lot of damage because of this. And also, while I was doing some research, I found a quote by an economist called Ellen Brown, and she ended up saying, quote, "By 2012, the government had paid $1 trillion in interest, twice its national debt. Interest on the debt is now the government's single largest budget expenditure, larger than healthcare, senior entitlement, or national defense," end quote. Jesus Christ, that is unbelievable. This is where we're spending most of our money. Most of your tax money goes towards that. And it hasn't been made any better by the fact that we have abhorrent spending by Justin Trudeau. And I even have a graph here that I ended up taking from, I believe it was the Fraser Institute ended up doing this. So let me just switch over here. So as we look at this debt up top, it's a federal government net debt from 1867, so from the beginning of our country to 2015, in billions of dollars. So as we look across the board here, it's been pretty steady, pretty small for the most part, and it's right around the mid of the Second World War when we really started to take on more debt, and it sort of compounded a little bit. But as we look when we hit 1975, so that's a year after Pierre Elliott Trudeau ended up starting borrowing from these private institutions, we just see a sharp incline in our debt. And sure, it's gone down a little bit, but for the most part, it's continued on an upward trend. This is what it has done by, instead of using our money in order to, instead of taking our money from the Bank of Canada, this has been the cause of taking the money from the private banks and these international banks. And the thing about these international banks is they're all owned by a small group of people. You can find them everywhere. They own the largest stock companies. They own all the banks. And so this money is really just going into hands of a few select billionaires, multi-billionaires, who are just keeping us into debt slavery. That is pretty much quite literally what we're doing. They're keeping us in debt slavery while they line their pockets with all your tax money, with millions upon billions of dollars. It is absolutely ridiculous. And this is actually completely unconstitutional, because there it is. So as we look on down here, this is actually taken from your charter, the charter of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It's section 91, Powers of the Parliament, and I've highlighted a few things. The exclusive legislative authority of the Parliament of Canada extends to all matters coming within the classes of subject next herein enumerated. And as we go down to section 91, subsection 14 and 15, it says currency and coinage, banking, incorporation of banks, and the issue of paper money. So this is something that our government is supposed to have control over, and it's for a very good reason. We need to control where our supply of money comes from, and we're not at the moment. As you can see, this is coming strictly from these other banks, and it is killing us. It is absolutely killing all Canadians. And there's even been a lawsuit that was launched against the Bank of Canada by the Committee of Monetary and Economic Reform. Its nickname is Comer, and is a very small and low-budget Toronto think tank. But they have been arguing that since I think it was about 2011 or so, they ended up starting to sue the government and sue the banks, sue the financial minister, because they were saying how unconstitutional this sort of activity was. And ever since 1974, when we started using these international banks, it's been continued on by every single prime minister, whether that's Brian Mulroney, whether that's Stephen Harper, whether that's Justin Trudeau. They've all continued the process instead of returning to taking loans from the Bank of Canada, once again, which can issue these loans to the government interest-free. But they started going through, but this organization, Comer, they ended up suing the bank, and they started winning a lot of lawsuits against them. And the whole point of the lawsuits were to return the way the money is loaned to us to pre-1974 periods. So completely undo everything that was done by Pierre Elliott Trudeau. And as it says, they allege the Bank of Canada, the Queen, the Attorney General, the Finance Minister, and the Minister of National Revenue are engaging in conspiracy with the International Monetary Fund, the Financial Stability Board, and the Bank for International Settlements to undermine Canada's financial and monetary sovereignty. That was a quote by the company, I think actually by their lawyer, who, when they were saying why this was actually a very important case, like what their case was hanging on. And they started winning this. But then somewhere around May of 2017, they tried to take this to the Supreme Court, but they didn't end up making it. The Supreme Court threw out the case, were not willing to hear their appeal. What was it called, actually? It said on May 4th, the Supreme Court of Canada dismissed Comer's permission to appeal application for the second judgment of the Federal Court of Appeal. Following established practice, the Federal Supreme Court does not issue reason when it dismisses a leave application. So they really are just... I couldn't help but feel, though, that this was deliberate. I mean, the Supreme Court of Canada makes its own decisions, and they can take on whatever case they want and don't want. But this, to me, this was a very important case, and they had been fighting this. Comer had been fighting this legal battle for 5.5 years or so, and then it gets dismissed by the Supreme Court. You figure this would be something that would be they would take on. It's much more important than some of the other Supreme Court cases that they hear. But the thing was, too, is I didn't really hear much about this as it was going on. It was really only when I started researching into the Bank of Canada that I started to figure this out. It seemed to be pretty absent from the news. I mean, I don't know about the rest of you. Did you ever hear about this Comer case that was going through? Because I never did. So to me, the fact that they were willing to throw it out, and again, like it said, they don't need to give a reason for why they threw it out. It seemed almost deliberate to me, because if they had won this, then we really would be back to where we were. We'd be back to taking money from the Bank of Canada, and we wouldn't have to worry anymore about these Bank of International Settlements, the International Monetary Fund, none of these. We never have to deal with any of these people again. But that's not the way things went down. It really would have helped everybody's lifestyle out. Every single one of us would have been better off, and your children would have been better off, and the other future generations of Canadians would be better off if we returned to this. We actually could have gotten inflation in hand. We actually could have started to get a handle on our debt. And even some of the Bank of Canada, each one has a governor, but each governor has some sketchy history with who they are dealing with. I mean, the current governor, Stephen Poloz, he's a member of the board of directors for the Bank of International Settlement, like literally one of these banks that we're talking about. He sat on the board. We had another one who had a 13-year career. This is Mark Carney, who served from he was appointed deputy in 2003. November 2004 to October 2007. But anyway, he had a 13-year career on Goldman Sachs. Yeah, like one of these huge stock markets. He was completely involved with them. We also had David Dodge, who served from 2001 to 2008. So wait, hold on. I guess I got Mark Carney wrong when he started. Oh, from November 2004 to 2007, Carney was a senior associate deputy minister at the G7. Okay, and the Canadian Department of Finances. Okay, so Mark Carney served after 2008, I believe. And so anyway, this other guy, David Dodge, he's a chairman for the board of directors on the C.D. Howe Institute. This is absolutely ridiculous. And then if we look into the members of the C.D. Howe Institute, those people who help fund them, who have a part in it. Hold on. We can see that JP Morgan Securities Canada also has a seat on them. We have the Rothschilds, who have a part of them. But if you look at the box that I put, that says, and maybe I'll make that a little bit clearer. That says Morneau Sobeco. Morneau Sobeco was when Morneau Sheppel and Morneau and Associates merged with Sobeco in 1997 to establish Morneau Sobeco. This is literally a company by our current finance minister, Bill Morneau. That's who we're talking about. He's the president and chief executive officer of Morneau and Sheppel. They have a seat on the C.D. Howe Institute. You can just see how it's all kind of coming together to be the exact same people. The exact same people are all involved in this whole situation. And even if we want to look more into the private banks, the big 6 banks that we have, there's usually you hear about the big 5, but we could also classify a 6th one if we're talking about the National Bank of Canada. So we have the National Bank of Canada, we got Scotiabank, the Bank of Montreal, TD, RBC, and then CIBC. Those are the big 6 banks in Canada. But you'll notice you can go and look up their major shareholders. Every single one Each bank is a major shareholder in each other. If you look at the National Bank of Canada, you can find that they pretty much all of them have the same, are all major shareholders. RBC, BMO, CIBC, Scotiabank, Toronto Dominion Bank, they all have the same, have the exact same stocks. They all are major shareholders of each other. And in fact, if we're even talking about Toronto Dominion Bank, the whole Rothschild and Co., they are in the same building as Toronto Dominion Bank. They sit in the TD Canada Trust Towers. So we can see that all of our money, everything doing with the Bank of Canada, comes back to the same group of rich billionaires. This is why we're doing this. This is why we're trying to keep us in debt slavery. There was a time when, before the whole fiat currency, before we're talking about money as we know it now, it was known as the gold standard that we used to run on. But then all the banks started to get off it at about the exact same time, which was about somewhere around the Great Depression. Now, there's actually, during World War I, a lot of countries got off the gold standard because they started having a lot of expenditures because of... they had a lot of expenditures due to the war that was going on. They had a lot that they had to put into it. So they actually suspended the gold standard for a while so that way they could print more money. But then after that happened, most of these countries got back onto the gold standard. And then around for most of these countries around 1930, I think England it was 1931, U.S. it was about 1933. And Canada, I think it was around the same period of time. I think it was about 1933. No, 1929, it looks like, as far as I can tell. We started getting off the gold standard, and everybody started going to this fiat currency, which led to fractional reserve banking. I'm sure there was some of this in play before we got off the gold standard, but it was a lot harder to do this at the time. But now with the way that we do banking now, you have fractional reserve banking. And what that means is, let's say that you have $100 million sitting in the bank. Fractional reserve banking means you have to hold a certain amount back. So let's say 10%. You can hold back 10%, which means you have to have $10 million sitting in your vaults at all time for people that want to take that money out, that actually want to go to the bank and say, hey, I want to withdraw this in physical cash. And you'd be, okay, I need to go to my vaults to get it. But the rest of it, the other 90%, you can loan out. So you loan it to people, then they owe it back to you. However, the way it works is that on record, you still have that $100 million sitting in your vaults, even though you've loaned out $90 million of it. So you've literally just created $90 million out of thin air because you have the amount that says that, because you have it where it says you have $100 million in your bank, but then all of a sudden, all these people that you loan to owe you $90 million. So that when it's all paid back, you officially, technically have, when everybody was to deposit that back in, you have $190 million. You've literally created money out of thin air. It's pretty much a Ponzi scheme in almost every sense of the word, in every sense of the term of a Ponzi scheme. So because of this, we are destined to fail sooner or later. That's the thing about a Ponzi scheme. It can never ever hold up forever. Sooner or later, it all comes crashing down. And this is what we can expect sooner or later. And one thing that I always, that made me suspicious when I was looking this up, and it could just be coincidence, but in 1929, it was October 24th, which I believe they called Black Wednesday, when the stock market crashed. Well, you remember that we've had a few crashes, there's been several crashes since then, of course. I think it was 1972, there was also another stock market crash of some kind. But the big one that we all remember was 2008. 2008 was when we had our last big stock market crash. Well, it just so happened that the first day of that stock market crash was October 24th, 2008, which became known as, I think it's not as popular as Black Wednesday, but it became known as Bloody Friday. And this was because the stock markets took a crash of about 10%, almost across the board. Each stock dropped by about 10% of what its value was. And this is what triggered the whole 2008 financial crash. And even back then, the Canadian banks took a bailout. It wasn't well reported on. There were a few other companies that we know about that took a bailout. I think Bombardier was one. I think GM Motors was one. But wasn't really widely reported on that the banks got a bailout, because one thing that the world considers is that Canada has a strong banking system, but this doesn't appear to be the case. If we needed a bailout back in 2008, then our banking system is not as strong as it used to be. So this is something actually how it relates back to Maxime Bernier, is Maxime Bernier has taken it to the Bank of Canada many times for the way that they loan out, and even for going off the gold standard. Now, could Canada return to the gold standard? It's not looking good if we want it to, because ever since then, our amount of gold has just we just don't really have much gold left. And actually, before I get into that, while we're still sort of on the topic of fractional reserve banking, I think I had another chart here that I had saved, which I wanted to bring up. Maybe I forgot it. Oh, here we go. Hold on, let me switch this over. So here we use this chart when it's talking about fractional reserve banking and how it does. And we're talking about the reserve requirement. The less that they have to hold back, the more money supply is created. As you can see over here on the right, we have a chart which is talking about the percentage. That would be the amount of percentage that the bank needs to hold back in their vaults. So if you have $100 million, 50%, you have to keep $50 million in your bank. But we're talking about 10%, which I think is more or less a standard for most banks these days. You can just see how it creates a huge amount of money supply that suddenly goes into circulation. Maybe even a little more accurate to say currency rather than actual money. But you put a huge amount of currency into circulation, which waters down our dollar, creates even more inflation, and it makes and because of it, you end up getting less per the amount of your dollar goes down, and the price of stuff goes up. This is why we're in the situation we are in today. But as I've kind of looked into it more and more, the other problem that we have with our gold, going back on the gold standard, is the fact that Canada has more or less sold off all of its gold. There really is not much left that we have. I got it, the notes down here somewhere. Here we go. So it actually started back when Brian Mulroney was in office, but ever since then it's continued on, where we started selling off our gold to other countries. Other countries started picking it up. As far as I can tell, Canada is about the 5th largest producer of gold, yet we are listed as number 80 when it comes to gold reserves. And there's one article by The Rebel which ended up stating that on November 4th, 2015, the day Justin Trudeau was sworn into office, the Financial Department International Gold Reserves report showed that we had $110 million in U.S. money worth of gold. A month later, it was $102 million U.S. By January, we were down to $58 million, and it became $24 million worth of gold in February. Now, we virtually have nothing. Canada has no gold reserves, and that's why we're listed number 80 at the moment. So getting back on the gold standard would be super difficult right now. And why the gold standard matters is because it's something to compare your money to. So you literally can only have as much currency in circulation, as much gold as you have. Because if maybe it'd be a better example would be the American dollar. I'll see if I can quickly pull it up. My computer's being a little slow right now, so hopefully it'll speed up a little bit. But the old American dollar ended up having, it actually used to have a seal on it, or a stamp that used to say, that you could redeem it for gold if you wanted. Hold on, I'm finding an image here. Oh, that's pretty small. Just give me a second. I almost got it. Here we go. That's a good one. So as we can see here, this is an old US, I guess this is a $100 bill, but you could literally get it, if you didn't want it in paper money, you could literally get it in gold instead. So that way you could pretty much have a flat rate. You wouldn't have to worry about inflation or watering down your dollar value. But this is something that is now gone because of the way that we do banking these days. So if you're wondering why we have so much, why your value of your dollar has suddenly dropped so much, and why you can no longer get, why it seems that everything's gone is so much more pricey these days, this is why. It's completely because of how we've changed. Instead of using the gold standard, we now have fiat currency, which isn't. You don't have any sort of comparison. We don't have anything to compare our $1 to in physical hard something like gold. That's something that you can actually hold, something that you need to have in order to justify having this amount of money in circulation. Now you can just have as much money as you want, and you water it down to a point where it just becomes quite useless after a while. Because there's actually, and a good example of this actually is Zimbabwe, because Zimbabwe has printed so much money, and for that we have Venezuela. Venezuela's inflation has gone up by thousands of %, which means that their dollar is next to worthless now, what it was a couple years ago. Hold on, I got it. Here we go. That is a $100 trillion bill from Zimbabwe, because they've printed so much money that this is how much, like now you can literally have a $100 trillion bill, but it is worth maybe about 40 cents American. This is what the sort of banking that we're talking about does. If you just print an amount of money and you have nothing to hold it to, you don't have any standard, then your money becomes worthless after a while. This was actually one of the dangerous things that ended up getting said by an NDP candidate in Ontario during the right before the June 7th election, as they were talking about debt and stuff, and she just said, we'll just print a bunch of money. Well, sooner or later, a $100 bill will be worth maybe a couple bucks American or something like that. So you can't just print money to solve your issues. And this is also the problem when you just have fractional reserve banking that just creates money out of thin air, creates currency out of thin air. And before we sign off on here, I wanted to go over a quick video that I came across, and I'm going to link the full video in the description below. But it's a guy that's talking about why he believes that another stock market crash is on its way. And so we're going to watch a little bit of it, and then we're going to skip to closer to the end, where that's a lot more of the more important information is being shown. Oop. Hold on. There we go. So,
a clip for you first.
You say that a huge sell-off is coming, the biggest in my lifetime. So when is it coming? First of all, that's the first question. When?
You know, crashes don't happen in one day. The market is going to go up for a while. I'm still optimistic about the U.S. stock market for a while, and Asian stock markets. It'll go up, and sometimes later this year or next, the decline will start in. But it doesn't happen in a day. And Stuart, when I said it's going to be the biggest market downturn in my lifetime, I mean, that's not so strange to me. 2008, we had a problem because of too much debt. Stuart, as you well know, the debt has skyrocketed since 2008.
Yeah.
So when I say it's going to be worse than my lifetime, how could it not be?
So you're a debt bomb guy. You're saying, look, the crash is coming, the huge sell-off is coming, and it's because of debt. So you say, I asked you when, and you kind of hedged a little, maybe late this year, early next year. And then I asked why, and you said it's the debt bomb. So that's your scenario here.
Yes, I mean, Stuart, do you remember 2008 and 2009? That was because of gigantic debt. It's getting worse. It's much worse now. The Federal Reserve alone's balance sheet is up 500% since then. By the way, Janet Yellen says we're never going to have another bear market in our lifetime. So maybe you shouldn't listen to me.
All right, guys.
So that was Jim Rogers who was saying that. So he's talking about how he believes there's going to be an even bigger crash that's coming. And it's quite possible, too, because it is true. If we even look at it ourselves, too, we're having our own problem with debt at the moment. Hold on, just got to find the area. We'll start from there. So we're having our own problem with debt right now, and even the housing market is not doing too hot. So we'll end up seeing what comes out of that, and maybe there is possibility. But here we go. We get into the more important information here.
Twice, 3 times. Now, why is that significant? Because there's an interesting theory in chart analysis that the more often price tests a key level, the more often the price comes to a certain level, the more likely it is it's going to break it. Okay, let me just repeat that because it's so important. The more times a market comes to test a key level, in this case the 2580 level here, the more likely it is that the market is going to go and break that level potentially soon in the next few months. So I think the fact that the stock markets, both the S&P and the Dow, are now testing this support level around 2580 on the S&P and a corresponding level on the Dow. The more times they're testing this level, the more likely it is that the markets are soon going to come down and break that level. If we just bring this chart a little bit to the right, okay, to the left, I should say, I think now the probability is more that we're going to soon, potentially in the next few months, break this level. All right. And in case you're wondering, is that a big deal? Absolutely, it's a big deal because there's also another theory in technical analysis of what's called breaking market structure. And by the way, it isn't just the S&P here that worries me. It's also what's happening on the NASDAQ. Let me bring the chart of the NASDAQ so you can see for yourself. Okay, here's the NASDAQ. Okay, now take a look at an interesting pattern that's developing here on the NASDAQ. What you see here is what's called in chart analysis as the head and shoulder reversal pattern. And the trigger for a reversal occurs when that happens, when the price breaks that neckline. So let me show you that chart of the NASDAQ. So this is the NASDAQ 100. Now, the pattern is not yet complete, but we can see something emerging here. Let me just show you this. You'll see this is potentially the head. This is the left shoulder. And likely this is the right shoulder. It is true that at the moment, the way things are shaping up on the NASDAQ 100, there is a sort of head and shoulder pattern, a bearish pattern developing here. Now, if the NASDAQ manages to break out and make new highs above 7,200, then that pattern is void. It's invalid. On the other hand, if the NASDAQ sees more weakness, and if we perhaps fall further, then this pattern begins to form completion. So going back to our chart, the S&P, bottom line is, guys, that as long as we're above this support level, as long as the stock markets continue to remain above 2580, yes, the path of least resistance is to the upside, and Jim Rogers is right. The trend is your friend. However, based on everything I'm looking at here, the fact that we're testing these key levels, the fact that so many market analysts are now jumping on the bandwagon that we're going to make new highs, that has me worried, that has me cautious, and I personally think that Jim Rogers will be proven correct this year that we're potentially heading for lower levels on the major stock markets.
So I felt that it was more important, it would be better to show that video rather than me try and explain it because I only know so much when we're talking about the stock market. He did a way better job than I ever could when describing about it. But take that information the way you want and pay attention. Perhaps we are heading towards a new crash that is coming up. For me, I think it is possible. I think it is likely. But for me, I'm going to be paying attention to the date when that happens because, like I said before, it was October 24th, 1929, when the stock market crashed that began the Great Depression. It was October 24th, 2008, when the stock market crashed that began the 2008 financial crisis. So for me, if it happened to come around that same time, then I'm really going to be beyond this, believing that it has more to do with manipulation rather than it just happens to be that way. Maybe I'm just a paranoid individual, but I can't help but feel that that's the way we're going. So I want to move on from that to just a couple last stories before I sign off for today. And the first one has to do with on June 14th, the Conservatives ended up forcing another marathon vote against the Liberals in the House of Commons. And this marathon vote had to do with trying to get trying to get them to tell us what the price of the carbon tax would be if they do try and implement it nationwide. Because that's the one thing, especially, that they have been unwilling to tell Canadians. How much is this carbon price going to cost us? So the Conservative government ended up forcing, I think it was a 30-hour vote. It ended up coming up, and you end up doing this by putting forward you look to scrutinize every single line of the bill, every single little part. You scrutinize it, and then you try and get them to eventually give in and force them to admit what they want to admit. And then the Conservatives would just pull all these motions, all these bills off the table, so that way everyone can go home. They would stop scrutinizing legislation, and then it would end. But in the end, but when all was said and done, we had no more price. We didn't know what the price was going to be on the carbon tax, which means either they don't know or they know and don't want to tell us. And I think they know. They implementing something like this, they wouldn't just implement it without having some idea of what it's going to cost. But I think the reason they don't want to tell us is because if they were to tell Canadians what this carbon price is going to cost us, then they're going to lose a lot of support. But the one thing that stood out was the fact that a Liberal MP, Omar Al-Ghabra, attacks Conservatives as Islamophobic for House of Commons votes on Eid Mubarak, even though the Liberals scheduled the vote timing. So Eid Mubarak is the end of Ramadan for the Islamic faith, and this is when the vote ended up coming into place. And so he ends up attacking the Conservatives, saying they're Islamophobic. But once again, it was the Liberals who ended up scheduling the time of the vote. And this was put out in a tweet, as Omar says, Eid Mubarak, friends. I wish I could celebrate it with you, but Andrew Scheer couldn't set aside partisanship for one day and is forcing votes on 30 hours straight on one of the holiest days for Muslims. And this ended up being rebutted by Aaron O'Toole, Conservative MP. This is both incorrect and disappointing, Omar. The first vote tonight at 10:30 p.m. is due to the Liberal-led schedule and Liberal mandate late-night sitting. I think you should apologize for misleading the people. So they're trying to claim partisanship. They're trying to hammer the Conservatives as being Islamophobic because of this. Yet they're the ones who decide. Literally, his own party decides that, which means they always try and paint the Conservative Party as being divisive. And you could probably point to a few examples where that's true. But time and time again, the Liberal Party of Canada has proven themselves to be the more divisive ones. They'll take any opportunity to paint the country as racist, homophobic, transphobic, this, that, the other. In fact, just actually the other day, there was a post that was put out by Andrea Horwath, the head of the Ontario NDP party, where she pretty much was talking about there were some people that came out to protest Pride Parade, and she ended up coming out and saying how this is like hate-filled and transphobic, homophobic. There are plenty of reasons why people would not like Pride. I mean, I've said before in my podcast that my libertarian side, I don't give a fuck if who gets married to who. But there's plenty of reasons why I would never take my kid to the Pride Parade. I mean, you have people there that are literally in dog collars with leashes on. You have the most flamboyant people there that don't represent the true side of a lot of gay and lesbian individuals who are just, most of them, I would say, are just your average regular day people. But then this is the impression that the Pride Parade gives off. And there's been plenty of times where you have naked people at the Pride Parade. Is this someplace you're supposed to take your kid? I mean, the idea is just, to me, ridiculous and, once again, divisive. The other thing I wanted to bring up before we end this has to do with what ended up happening after the G7. So as we all know, that after the G7 took place, it seemed like we didn't make too much headway with Donald Trump and the Americans when it came to NAFTA. And then Justin Trudeau comes out with his press conference saying Canada will not be pushed around. And, this whole, the tariffs that have been placed on our steel and aluminum industry and the threats of, the threats of coming out against the auto industry came after the press conference. He did this after Trump left instead of dealing with them there and then when he had the time and the opportunity to do it, but that didn't end up coming up. However, new information has come out about that. And we can see growing evidence Justin Trudeau is misleading Canadians about trade war for his selfish political gains. So he says establishment consensus around the trade war between Canada and the U.S. is starting to get some pushback. And the closer people look, the more it seems that Justin Trudeau has been misleading Canadians about what really going on in an attempt to put his own political interest ahead of the interests of the Canadian people. Amazingly, even a clip from the CBC casts some doubts on what's really happening by revealing info that wasn't being discussed before. The clip notes that Donald Trump had agreed to key demands of the Canadian negotiators on NAFTA by dropping his push for a sunset clause, which would make the agreement need renewal every 5 years. Canadian negotiators had repeatedly said that the sunset clause was a red line in negotiations, and Trump dropping it was a big concession. In fact, it appeared that both sides were very close to an agreement and left the G7 with a feeling of goodwill, but then things turned south. And this was because of Justin Trudeau's press conference. And we have a video here. So we're just going to take a quick look at it. It's not very long. I think it's about a minute. If it'll come up. Hold on, people.
Well, our Ottawa Bureau Chief Rob Russo has been working the phones today. And Rob, what have you heard from Canadian officials?
Well, let me take you back, first of all, to 5 p.m. on Friday in Charlevoix, okay? There's a bilateral meeting at the end of the first day of the G7 summit between President Trump and Prime Minister Trudeau. And it's going so well. People are very excited. The Prime Minister's key advisors are there. Larry Kudlow is there. They're talking trade. Steve Mnuchin has been working the phones. He's not there, working the phones with Finance Minister Bill Morneau. How well is it going? Trump has been asking for a sunset clause. At one point, he waved away the notion of the sunset clause, surprising his own chief negotiator, according to people who were there. And people think it's great. Next thing they hear at the end of this summit, they're having a little celebration at the end of it all when the tweet is read out to them. And their reaction is, this has got to be a parody tweet. They didn't believe that it was actually real. They had to check. They checked and found out it was real, and then realized at that moment that they were in a dangerous parallel political universe and had to jump into action.
And as we read through the rest of it, it says, in between the good meetings and the Trump tweet was Trudeau's press conference, which didn't mention anything about the sunset clause in the negotiation. As you can see, this is very different from the general message that Trudeau government has been pushing. It is absolutely different because the way that the Trudeau government presented it, they presented it as if Trump was just completely was not wavering on anything, and then we couldn't reach any agreements. When we did reach an agreement, we were actually down to a good place with them. And then Justin Trudeau comes out with that. Justin Trudeau, who is a weak fucking leader, a weak fucking individual, had to try and act tough. But he could only act tough after Trump left. And then things got a lot worse because of it. Maybe we could have even gotten the steel and aluminum tariffs lifted if we were engaging in negotiation properly. But that's not what our current government did. We actually had a good opportunity. We were starting to get back on a good footing with our biggest trade partners and our closest allies. But then Trudeau, in an effort to make himself look tough, he ends up screwing over every single Canadian, and he's screwing over a big part of Canadian workers. I mean, the steel and aluminum industry, sure, maybe it's not the biggest industry in Canada, but it employs a lot of people. It brings in a lot of revenue for Canada. I think altogether, when we're talking about trade with the U.S. between steel and aluminum, it was about $7 billion, I believe, when in aluminum, I think. It was about almost $7 billion that we do in trade with Americans for aluminum. And then when we're talking about steel, it was about $5 billion. So we're looking at about $12 billion that profit that we make with the Americans when we're talking about those industry of trade. And now that's been put in jeopardy, including the auto industry after Trump saw that. All because Justin Trudeau thought he could get away with it. Go on, make a speech about that, and there would be no problems whatsoever. He's screwed over many Canadians because of it. This is unbelievable. I mean, maybe I shouldn't say unbelievable. This is actually right up Trudeau's alley. So this is why I can't believe that so many people still think that Justin Trudeau is a good leader for Canada. And he even got an approval bump after this everything that went on with them, and when they were saying that we're going to be tough, we're not going to be pushed around. They actually ended up getting more approval because of that. But now we're back to square one, practically. And Trump from the start never really seemed pretty keen on NAFTA negotiations. He seemed like he wanted to take a much more protectionist approach when it comes to America. And even before, his main beef was with Mexico. We could have easily solved this if we just had let Mexico deal with their own problems and Canada had dealt with our own problems. Because then, when he was putting his focus on Mexico, and even he still has beef with China when it comes to trade. While this was all going on, we could have just come in, negotiated, and we could be done by now. We could be done NAFTA negotiations. We wouldn't even be in this situation if we had a good, strong leader. If we had a leader who knew how to negotiate in office. But we don't. And now we've been screwed over once again by stupid piece of shit Justin Trudeau. All because he wanted to make himself seem like he's a tough guy, make himself feel like he was relevant, make himself feel like he's actually standing up to Trump when he's doing nothing of the sort. He's standing up against Trump when it's completely unnecessary, and the most recent one is has to do with this whole idea, the whole thing about children, when it comes to illegal immigrants, asylum seekers, about how many children are being separated from their parents. Trudeau stayed quiet for a little while, and then within the last day or two, he speaks up to condemning Trump and how his actions because of it. And I'll actually get into that in my next episode because I'm going to put it out this weekend. I just wanted to get another one out there because I really hadn't put anything out in a while, about a week and a half, so I wanted to do this. So I'll have another episode coming out on the weekend, and I'll be covering that a lot more about what's going on between that. But this is not the right time for Justin Trudeau to open his mouth and condemn Trump. We're still in a rough spot with Trudeau. We're still in a rough spot with America and Trump and the rest of them right now. We can't afford to have our to be bad-mouthing the Americans right now, and this is their problem. That's their issue to deal with. There's no reason for Justin Trudeau to open his mouth, make the situation worse, but once again, he's done that, and this is not going to make anything easier with anything that we're negotiating, anything we're trying to do with America. I can tell you one thing, the 2019 election cannot come soon enough. It really fucking can't. We already in Ontario dealt the Liberals a fucking killer blow. We dealt them a killer blow from taking them from 55 seats down to 7. They lost party status. This is, and then now even in Quebec, things are not looking good. There was a by-election where the Conservatives completely routed the Liberals, and Quebec has been a Liberal stronghold for some time. So Justin Trudeau, at least the Liberals on the provincial level, are really, really getting destroyed. And I believe that this is just is just sort of a vision of the future of what's going to come in the 2019 election. I think, once again, the Liberals are going to get completely routed. And hopefully we can take the Liberals down to back to where they were in 2011, where they lost even the title as the official opposition, where they were down to a third party because they lost so many seats in that election against the Harper government. And even though Justin Trudeau brought him back from the brink, I think he once again is going to kill the Liberal Party. That after this, when it comes to federal politics, the Liberals are going to be completely meaningless. It'll come down between the NDP and the Conservatives, really. And that's why 2019 cannot come fast enough. Because right now it doesn't sound like the NDP are going to win the 2019 election, which leaves the Conservative Party. And I mean, I've become very disillusioned with the Conservative Party with the way they acted, but they are still better than the alternative. Thank you all for joining me on the podcast today. I'm Adrian Lloyd, and this is just my stupid opinion.